Welcome back. The mining-affected communities United in Action has expressed outrage over the 284 million rand that is reportedly missing from the social and labor plan across the 11 mining sites. The organization says this robs poor communities of opportunities. To tell us more about this report, I am joined now by Phyllia Ngoatje, who's the head of the paralegal at the MACUA WAMUA Advice Office. Phyllia, good to have you on the program this evening. Firstly, can you help us understand the term crumbs capture and how it specifically describes the misuse of social and labor plan funds across these mining communities?
Thank you, Chancellor. I think the term really refers to how social and labor plan commitments and the funds that are allocated towards that are really crumbs of the profits that mining companies actually get from mining activities in their local communities. And the fact that they're not delivering on their promises indicates that there is a capture of these crumbs, and that is the term that we are referring to it as.
So Macau has estimated that at least 284 million rand is unaccounted for across these 11 mining sites. How is this estimate calculated, and what makes this figure so alarming?
So we conducted 11 social audits in 11 communities, right? And these communities and social and labor plans have budgets attached to them. And so from those budgets and the audited projects that we've audited, we can see how much was supposed to be actually delivered, as well as how much was not delivered from there. And then we extrapolated a figure to see how much would be more, you know, not kind of given to communities
Yeah.
if that non-delivery continues.
So very interesting is that the audit also reveals a stark contrast between the billions in profits generated by these mining companies and also the poor state of community development. How does this disparity then impact the communities, and what does it say about the role of mining companies in social responsibility?
Well, for example, in Meloding, where we conducted a social audit on Tetra 4's operations, we found that they were supposed to deliver a community hall, expand the gym area, do a bunch of other security upgrades like fencing, and none of that had been done. Right. In other communities in the Northwest, we found that poultry projects weren't actually delivered upon fully. We found that there's either partial commitments, partial compliance with commitments, or non compliance with commitments. And that really is the shocking part of all of this.
Phyllia, the report also critiques the just transition narrative, which is supposed to promote this inclusive growth and climate resilience. Can you explain how the just transition is being used as a cover for these fraudulent activities and failed promises that you cite?
So all of the mines that we audited are parts of the critical minerals chain, right? So them not fulfilling their social and labor plan commitments really does disadvantage communities, because communities therefore cannot benefit from the benefits that they're supposed to be getting from mining companies. And this is really just a small amount of benefit that they're supposed to be accruing from these mining companies operating in their areas. And that's why this narrative of just transition comes into play, because if a transition is really to be just, communities can't be ignored.
Yeah. With issues like ghost projects, these inflated tenders that we're seeing, and an elite capture coming to light, what does this reveal then about the systematic nature of the problem? And how do these practices then continue to persist without any accountability here?
I think really we need to look at who owns the mines, right? It's always business, sometimes it's the state. And there must be some kind of collusion between the state and business to deprive communities of what they're actually supposed to be receiving as benefits. And that's what the report really highlights. The report highlights how In the Northern Cape, for example, UMK, which is owned partially by the state, the Russians, as well as other comrades, they have not completed any of their social and labor plan commitments, and the ones that they were busy completing only benefited the mines. And that really must be, we must not turn a blind eye towards that.
I want to turn our attention to communities like Paula, Monono, as well as Robakal. I mean, they've been left without basic infrastructure, including clinics and roads here. How has this situation then worsened the livelihoods of the residents in these areas?
The livelihoods of the residents in these areas are really worsened because in Rabokala, for example, they were supposed to have high mast lights, and the company that was operating there recently just went under, um, what is it called? Business rescue. So in those instances, if we accept that social and labor plan commitments are commitments that are tied to the mining right of a company, and we also accept that the funds should be earmarked prior to, you know, ongoing operations, the projects should be done nonetheless. And when we look at high mast streetlights as well as water projects or road infrastructure, etc., we find that that really disadvantages the community because it poses a risk to security, to their health, to their livelihoods, exactly like that, because then they can't live without these essential resources, etc.
Yeah. The report also does highlight shockingly low completion rates for projects like only the 10% completion in Mononono, for instance. What do you think is behind such low delivery, and how can these projects then be held accountable to indeed ensure that they meet the promised goal?
Mining companies are just not willing to share their profits with communities. They don't see communities as, important stakeholders for them to comply with their duties. And it's made worse by the fact that the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources is not willing to safeguard the rights of communities by doing their oversight role at their maximum capacity, right? Because they have capacity constraints. It's really just a dire situation for communities.
Yeah. Can you provide more details on how what are being called local elites are hijacking these SLP funds, which are really meant for community development? And how does this form part of this corruption? And how does it further disenfranchise already vulnerable communities here?
I can give a practical example of that, in fact. In Meloding, where Tetra 4 is operating, we found that, for example, a project which was supposed to have containers for women to use, that the containers were delivered, but the use is not for actual women in the community. It's actually being used by local councillors, and things like that aren't a rare occurrence in our line of work. We find that in a lot of communities, a lot of the projects either serve the mining companies or they serve the local ward councillors, etc., because the municipality is really the main stakeholder that mining companies liaise with instead of communities in this regard.
Let's look at the case of Chancellor House and its reported failure to meet SLP obligations in Mahujaning, for instance. It's particularly quite striking. Let's speak about this. What steps, if any, are being taken to hold entities like Chancellor House accountable, especially for these shortcomings?
Well, the best we can do is report it to the DMPR and organize locally. Whether the DMPR is really going to take this up is up to them, and we need to put pressure on them to do so. That's as far as I can take that statement.
All right. And Phyllia, as we wrap, MACUA has been at the forefront of these investigations. What is the organization then planning moving forward to ensure that these findings lead to actual change? And how can the public and government then push for this greater accountability, if you will, in this situation?
We're definitely going to be liaising with the Department of Mineral and Petroleum Resources more closely to draw attention to the findings of this report, as we've done in the past. There's a company that we've recently um, negotiated with the DMPR about their non-compliance, and it was a long road to do so. And we're finding that when we get lawyers involved and our civil society partners involved, they do respond a little bit more quickly. So it's about writing letters to the companies as well as making follow-ups with the DMPR to ensure that there is some kind of accountability and a commitment to ensuring that these projects are done in the near future.
Phyllia Ngoatje, thank you so much for breaking down the complexities behind what's being termed crumbs capture and for really shedding light on the grave issues that mining-affected communities do face. It's quite clear that the problem is not just about mismanagement. It is about systematic exploitation that continues to worsen inequality and poverty. Of course, Phyllia has been giving us her organization's perspective